Hello and welcome. We'll wait just a few more moments for guests to join the session. In the meantime, just a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be available to watch later on. As we get ready to start our session, another reminder to please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions. Staff on the back end of this webinar are helping to answer questions submitted through the Q&A, and we'll also address some questions live towards the end of the session. When you're submitting questions, please don't share any personal information through the Q&A, and do remember that you can send questions anonymously if you would like to. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can during our session. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for the first portion of our International Parent and Family Orientation Program. My name is Margot Clifford. I am the Director of Parent and Family Programs at UC San Diego, and I am so excited to welcome you all to the Triton family. I'm also so glad that you could join us for this session about your student's visa status. Before we introduce our presenter, I would love to get to know who is joining us with just a few quick questions for everyone here. So first up, where are you joining us from? If you could jump in the chat and quickly just share what country you're zooming in from for our session, that would be great. Okay, we've got a couple folks from India, Greece, India in San Diego. Okay, a couple folks here on campus already, maybe. I appreciate that folks are chiming in sort of in groups. We've got the Canada crew jumping in at the same time. Okay, great. Thank you all for sharing a little bit about where you're coming in from. Russia, Saudi Arabia, we've got a pretty widespread crew here tonight. So next, we're going to launch a quick poll. We'd love for you to let us know what college your student is in. So you should see the poll window come up on your screen in just a moment. And go ahead and let us know what college your student is from. Give folks just one more minute there. Looks like almost everyone's chimed in. Okay, so we've got somebody from every college represented. Go ahead and move on to our next poll question. We've got one more final poll question. Has your student studied in the United States before attending UC San Diego? So it's looking like most people, this is their student's first experience studying in the US. A couple folks have had their student be in US in high school. A couple folks, their student went to a community or other college in the US and is transferring, but it looks like most folks, we're looking at some first timers here. So that's exciting, and I'm sure also a little stressful, but that's okay. We are here to walk you through all the things that you need to know. So thank you again for sharing a bit about yourselves. We're very excited to have you all be part of our community. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Lisa Swid, who is the Manager of Student Services with the International Students and Programs Office. So Lisa, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Margot. So hello to all of our international parents and families. On behalf of the International Students and Programs Office, also known as ISPO, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be zooming in from. I'm so happy that you're here, and it was great to see that there's a great representation from all over the world. We love to see that. So today we will be talking about your student support system at UC San Diego. We will review your students' visa documents. We will be discussing the visa regulations and review resources for travel and what your student can do if they encounter any issues when entering the United States. Your student should have already attended a Know the Rules orientation session with our office. And that session will have covered very similar information to what I will be presenting to you today. And so although your student is responsible for their status, of course, it is so great that you as a parent and family members, it's great for you to also understand their visa documents and the rules of their visa status. I'm also a parent, and I know that when it's time for my child to go to college, I definitely plan to be as involved as you all are today or this evening. I'll probably end up trying to camp out outside of his dorm, but I'm scared to think about that time. So I think you all are so brave and so amazing for embarking on this journey with your son or daughter. So if you can go to the next slide. So just so you know, ISPO is here for your students. As your student prepares to start their program of study at UC San Diego, our office can help with any questions that they might have. UC San Diego is a very large campus, and we know that it can be very confusing to navigate, and it can be very confusing to know who to go to if you have questions. So just know that they can always start with our office. We will do our best to try to answer any questions that they have. And if we are not able to answer it ourselves, then we will do our best to point them in the right direction. We have 20 friendly advisors, administrative staff, and student assistants. And again, we are really here to support your students. We can advise them on understanding their immigration status, rules for working on or off campus, traveling, and how to adjust to campus and just campus life, how to succeed in classes. It's a lot to take in, so just know that they are supported. We also have a lot of different programming, lots of engaging events. Like, for example, all this week, every day we have coffee hour. It's a great way to meet new students. I actually saw some parents there yesterday, so maybe you were there as well. But really, we're here to help them to shape the best experience so that they can experience success while they're here at UC San Diego. Next slide, please. So your students' immigration documents are extremely important. They not only show that the student is in the United States in a valid immigration status, but it can also be used to open a bank account or apply for a driver's license, work authorization, and other benefits. So super, super important. So these are the documents that we will be reviewing. And again, this is information that was also presented to your student. So let's go to the next slide. The first document that we will review is the passport. The passport is issued by your student's country of citizenship, and your student should ensure that the biographical information is correct, and also take note of the expiration date. The passport has to be valid for at least 6 months into the future from the date of entry into the United States. And again, the renewal process can take some time. So make sure you have your students start early. Just make sure that the passport is not expiring anytime soon. It can be renewed inside or outside the United States at your country's embassy or consulate. Next slide, please. The next document that we will review is the visa. And this is something that is located inside of the passport. You can think of the visa like a key. So you need it to enter the United States, but once you're inside, you don't actually need it. So it's an entry document. So as long as your student is maintaining their visa status, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit later in the presentation, it's actually okay to be inside the United States with an expired visa. So just think of it like a key. You need it to enter. Once you're inside, you don't really need it. But if you depart the United States, you'll need to make sure that you renew it in order to come back in. If it's expired, the only way to renew the visa is from outside the United States. So that's different than the passport. The passport you can renew from inside or outside the United States. The visa you can only renew from outside the United States. The next slide, we will discuss the Form I-20. So F1 and J1 students are obligated to keep their Form I-20 if they're an F1 student, or a Form DS-2019 if they're a J1 student. They must make sure to keep it up to date. They should submit any changes to our office within 10 days of the change. So for example, this could be an extension to their program end date, could be a change to their program level. Perhaps they're going from master's to PhD or vice versa. Maybe they're changed their major, maybe their name changed. So any changes, they want to make sure to report that to us so that we can update their document accordingly. Next slide. The next document to review is the Form I-94. And this can only be generated and printed out by your student once they have arrived to the United States. So this document is known as the Arrival Departure Record, and it can be printed out by visiting the U.S. Customs and Border Protection website. This form shows how the port of entry admitted your student. So it will reflect the class of admission and the visa type that was used to admit them. So your student will either be admitted as an F1 student or a J1 student. It will inform them of how long they were admitted to the United States. So it will show an admit until date. And you want to make sure that your student checks this document after admission to make sure that the admit until date reflects DS, which stands for duration of status. So there should not be a date listed. It should just say DS. And that means as long as their I-20 or their DS-2019 is valid. So if they need to extend their program end date, for example, then they are okay to remain inside the United States. Next slide. So again, the student will be able to print the form I-94 from the CVP website, and then just check that everything is correct. They can save it as a PDF and keep it for their records. And each time that they enter the United States, so let's say they go home for the winter break or spring break, or they travel, when they come back in, they'll get a new I-94 record. So each time they depart and come back in, they want to make sure that the information is correct. If any of the information is not correct, then they should contact our office and we can give them some advice on how to correct it. Next, so in addition to your students' immigration documents, they'll also need to report their most updated addresses to ISPO, and they will do that on the website. And this is super important because UC San Diego relies on this information to contact parents and families in case of any travel or health emergencies. So this is where they would report their family member or friend, like their emergency contact information that's inside or outside the United States. So we definitely want to ensure that students have the most up-to-date information there. Next slide. So while your students' immigration documents are important and it needs to be updated as needed, it's also super important to understand your students' immigration status before, during, and after their program of study at UC San Diego. So all students currently hold an initial SEVIS record. Once they enter the United States and begin classes, then ISPO will activate their SEVIS record, and that will show that they are in valid active F1 or J1 status. So we issue the I-20, they enter the United States, they check in, and then we activate the record. If they don't check in, then that could cause some problems to their immigration record because that means that we haven't activated it yet, and then it will eventually just expire. So it's super important that they do check in with our office, and it's an online form. So it's really quick. They basically just go to iPortal, they check in, upload their I-94, and then we will be able to check them in and register their record. During their program, students should follow all the rules and reporting requirements, which we'll go over in the next slide. But a student's status should continue to remain in active status through the last date of enrollment of their program of study. And then once their program completes, then they will automatically enter into what is called the grace period. And for J1 students, that's a 30-day grace period. For F1 students, it's 60 days. And during that time, students can apply for employment authorization. They might choose to begin a higher degree program. Perhaps they were in a bachelor's degree and now they want to pursue a master's, or master's wanting to pursue a PhD. So they'll have that opportunity to apply for a change of level. Perhaps they want to change their visa status, or they might plan to depart the United States. So during that grace period, they have all of those options. And they'd still be okay to be inside the United States during that time. So the next slide will briefly go over the rules that they'll need to follow during their program of study to maintain their F1 or J1 status. So maintaining valid F1 or J1 status in the United States means that your student is following the federal regulations for their type of visa. So these are the rules that that the student would need to follow in order to maintain their status. So the first is that they check their visa documents to ensure accuracy upon every arrival to the United States. So again, every time they depart, when they come back in, they want to make sure that it was processed correctly at the port of entry. The second thing to pay attention to is that they are required to be enrolled full-time during each quarter. At UC San Diego, full-time is considered 12 units. So it's 12 units for the fall quarter, 12 units for winter, and 12 units for spring. The summer term is actually considered a vacation term, so enrollment is not required. But if your student needs to go below 12 units for any reason, there could be an academic reason or medical reason, or perhaps it's their final quarter and they only have 1 or 2 classes left to take, then they should definitely speak with our office and we can guide them to how to apply for what's called a reduced course load, so that they do not need to be enrolled full-time. So the regulations state that they need to be enrolled full-time, but just know that there are exceptions, and they would need to apply for the reduced course load to go below 12 units. The third thing is that your student will need to report any updates to their I-20 or DS-2019 within 10 days. The fourth thing is reporting any address changes. So that includes updating emergency contact information. That's within 10 business days through Triton Link. The fifth thing to be aware of to maintain status is that they should only accept authorized employment. Students are eligible to work on campus without authorization, but if they want to work off campus, then they do need to apply for a proper work authorization. And we have a lot of information on our website about that if you want to learn more about employment authorization for your student. And then finally, the last thing to be aware of is that your student needs to be maintaining adequate health insurance. So enrollment in the UC student health insurance plan that will fulfill the requirements. And that's something that they are automatically enrolled in. If they have a different type of health insurance, then they would have to apply for the waiver. And you can move on to the next slide. So we'll briefly review travel for your students. So many of your students are preparing to travel, or they might be traveling very soon, or they will travel eventually, or they're already here. So they can visit itravel.ucsd.edu. Very easy website to remember if you need to review which documents they'll need to seek entry or re-entry into the United States. So when we issued the I-20 or the DS-2019, that includes a travel endorsement, and that signature is good for 1 year. So let's say so right now it's September, let's say in December, your student wants to travel home for the break, the travel signature is still valid. If they want to travel next summer, and let's say they're going to enter in September and maybe we issued their document to them in June, they will need to apply for what's called a travel signature, because that travel signature is only good for 1 year. We get a lot of urgent travel signature requests right around this time, just because it's easy to forget. So just try to remind your students to apply early if they are traveling next year. And then if you can move on to the next slide. And then prior to travel, it is important for your student to know how to contact ISPO in the event that they encounter any issues at the port of entry. So the International Student Emergency Card is available for download on ISPO's website. They can also stop by our office. We have it printed, and it's like a wallet-sized card, so they can pick that up and just keep it in their wallet. We are available during and after business hours for emergency travel situations. We ask the students don't call the emergency phone, to check on a process, like just a standard document that we need to process. There's other ways to contact our office, but if they are at the port of entry, for example, and they're having issues, they can certainly call the emergency phone, and we will hopefully be able to assist them. And our contact information is at icontact.ucsd.edu. So you can see all of the various ways that you can reach out to our office. And moving to the last slide. So hopefully I know this was a lot of information, and hopefully I did not overwhelm you. Hopefully it was informative, but we can go ahead and move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. And then I compiled a list of links of the many resources that we have at ISPO. So again, there's many ways to connect with our office. We are available in person, virtually, by phone, and email. So we really look forward to meeting and welcoming your students at UC San Diego this fall term. It's right around the corner. We're already here. So hoping for a very smooth and successful start. So yeah, let's go ahead and open it up to any questions that you might have.
Lisa, thank you so much. That was quite a bit of information that you explained so very thoroughly and clearly. So thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, and folks, please feel free to continue to ask questions using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your Zoom screen there. First up, we have a parent whose student has a 2-year visa and wants to know what his student should do at the expiration of the visa.
Yeah, so I mean, again, so the visa is an entry document. So assuming your student has already used the visa to enter, the visa, as long as it's valid, they can depart and come back in, as long as they have all of their other valid documents, meaning their passport that's good for 6 months into the future, their I-20 that has the valid travel signature, the visa that's valid. Sometimes it's good to have just a printout that shows course enrollment. But if, let's say 2 years from now or 3 years from now, your student has plans to travel, they'll need to apply to renew the visa to come back in. So, I mean, it kind of depends on how long your student's program is. So if your student is in a 2-year master's program, they might be okay to, study, and there might not be any need to renew the visa. But if they are planning to depart and come back in after the expiration of the visa, they'll need to make plans to renew it. And the Department of State, you can check visa wait times. Sometimes students, if they're planning to go home over the winter break or the spring break, for example, they might use that time to renew their visa while they're home. It's always good to renew the visa when you're in your home country. Sometimes you can go to a different country as a third country national to renew it, but it's always good to check with the consulate or embassy just in case they're not accepting third country nationals to renew the visa. So at the expiration date of that visa, it's okay for her to be inside the United States, but if she departs, she'll need to renew it to come back in. That was a very long-winded answer. Hopefully it answered your question.
Thank you, Lisa. Another question, and it's not specifically visa related, but somewhat tangential. Is there a waiting period for students in order for them to look for employment? Do they have to be here for a certain number of months or a certain amount of time before they can start searching for authorized employment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So to work on campus, they do not need authorization, so they can start working on campus right when they arrive. They can enter the United States up to 30 days before their program start date, so they can work on campus without authorization. However, if they want to work off campus, then they need to apply for work authorization, and then they would need to wait 3 consecutive quarters, assuming that they're a new student to UC San Diego or to the United States. So if they're a brand new student to the United States, they would need to be enrolled and have an active SEVIS record for 3 consecutive quarters, which is considered 1 academic year. So they would be enrolled in fall quarter, for example, if they're starting this fall, I'm assuming. So they'd be enrolled fall quarter, winter quarter, spring quarter, and then they can start working off campus next summer, so summer of 2024. And that would be with something called CPT. That's curricular practical training. And that is a form of work authorization where they would be getting course credit for the work that they're doing. And that is something that they're eligible to apply for after they've been enrolled for 3 consecutive quarters. But again, they are able to work on campus right away, right when they arrive. That's considered incidental to their status. And all this information is at iworked.ucsd.edu. There might be too much information there, but it's all split up into before you graduate, after you graduate, on campus, off campus employment. So it's all spelled out. And then we have plenty of webinars and ways for your student to learn about how to apply for work authorization when they're ready to do so.
Excellent. So it sounds like there's no shortage of information out there. Students just have to visit ISPO and find it. Another question that I think I'll actually take this one. Someone was asking if power of attorney is required to access your student's health and academic records. No. However, your students' records are private, and they're private for your student. There's a law essentially in the United States. It's the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. We call it FERPA. And this essentially prevents the university from disclosing your student's educational information to anyone other than your student unless they submit a form saying that they are willing to share that information. So power of attorney is not required. However, your student would have to submit a FERPA waiver, and they would have to explicitly state what information can be shared and with whom. And even then, you would then have to request access to that information. You wouldn't be able to just it wouldn't be sent to you automatically. So I hope that helps clarify that. If you have any other questions about FERPA, the Parent and Family Programs Office answers a lot of FERPA-related questions, so you're welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer that for you. Jumping back into your neck of the woods, though, Lisa, we have another question from a parent asking, for Canadians, what documents are needed to be shown at the border?
So at the border, they would need their passport and their I-20 or their DS 2019. And I think we have a section on our website for Canadian citizens, which I can pull up and put in the chat for you as well, just so you have it to reference.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we've got someone asking if some of you could just explain the travel signature piece again, sort of a quick recap there.
Yeah, so the travel signature is something that is on your I-20 or your DS 2019 or your students. And it's a travel endorsement. So basically it's a way for us to confirm that your student is still in status. So it's good for 1 year. So when your student initially enters the United States, their I-20 or DS 2019 is in initial status. When they begin their program of study, they will go through what's called a check-in process, and then we activate their SEVIS record. That shows that they're maintaining their F1 or J1 immigration status. And then in a year from now, if they want to depart, when they want to come back in, the officer at the port of entry will want to ensure that they're still maintaining their status. So when they apply for the travel signature, it's basically us checking to show that they've maintained their enrollment, that they haven't been, not enrolled in classes, for example, then we would not be able to maintain their SEVIS record. The SEVIS record is something that we maintain for if they're an F1 or J1 student, that means that they're full-time enrolled. So if they're not enrolled, then we're not able to maintain the SEVIS record. So providing the travel signature is us endorsing the student saying, yes, they are maintaining their F1 or J1 status. We recommend that you allow them to come back into the United States to resume their studies.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for the recap. The guest asking how we renew an expired passport in San Diego. And the good news is there's actually a passport office on campus. Your student can make an appointment on campus to renew their passport. So we make that very, very easy. We can certainly share more information. Feel free to reach out to the Parent and Family Programs office and we will share links and information with you. Lisa, parent is asking if someone with an H-4 visa can work on campus.
That's a great question. I would recommend, so if they're an H-4, there's a good possibility that you probably worked with an attorney for that visa status. So I would recommend confirming any of the rules or regulations with that attorney, just because we only process the F1 and J1 immigration documents. So I don't really want to advise on H-4 just because that's not our area of expertise, but definitely consult with the immigration attorney who processed your documents on their employment authorization and whether or not they're able to work.
Great, thank you. One parent here has a student whose orientation is tomorrow. Are there any forms or documents that he would need to bring or fill out when he arrives on campus?
The orientation is for
tomorrow.
their student? Oh,
yeah, their student's orientation is tomorrow.
I'm not sure. Is the orientation with the college or with our office? I wonder. I guess I would ask your son or daughter, your student. I have a child, so I just assume everyone's child is a child. Your adult student, check their email and see what was asked for them to bring. I'm not sure because I'm not sure which orientation it is. Margot, maybe you have more information about the orientation.
I don't know all of the nuances here, but we can safely guess, I think, that when it comes to visas and being in the United States, there's nothing that the student would need to bring with them, any kind of documentation related to their visa or immigration status that they need to have on hand, right? So that's all been taken care of. So,
right, yeah.
Great. So then when it comes to your student orientation, every college does orientation just a little bit differently, just to keep everyone on their toes. So your student should certainly check their email and see what their orientation leaders in their orientation office has requested of them. But when it comes to any visa or immigration status pieces, there's nothing that your student will need to do when they arrive on campus. Okay, let's see. Got a couple other questions here that we can sift through. Okay, parent is asking about the mailing address when they're on campus. Your student will get information about their mailing address specifically. It will generally look at a mailbox number that they're assigned on campus. So your student will be able to share with you the address to the campus, and it'll include their mailbox number. So that information will also be shared at orientation. When your student arrives on campus and moves into their residence hall, that is when they will get keys to their mailbox, and they'll learn that information as well. Is there a notary on campus? So we do have a student legal services office on campus. So if you are going to be here attending our webinar about safeguarding your student records, which is happening on Thursday, our student legal services team will be there. So it's a great time to jump in and ask about notaries. We've got time for just a few more questions here. Let's see. We have a parent who's asking about if they should submit their POA in advance or only when they need access to certain records. And a reminder that you don't need power of attorney for your student's records. Your student would need to submit a FERPA waiver. So the FERPA waiver, your student would need to submit that in advance. That needs to be a record that is submitted in writing, so that when the person who has access to your student's records does request them, the university can make sure that they're only releasing records to someone who's already been pre-approved. And Lisa, one other sort of recap question. Are there documents that a student needs to upload into their portal regarding their visa status, anything they need to upload into iPortal when they do arrive in the US?
Yeah, so once they arrive, they would submit the check-in form, and it will ask them to upload a copy of their I-9 form. And I can put a link in the chat as well.
Great, thank you. And then a question about sort of visa status and extracurricular activities. One person has noted that their son wants to take flying classes over the summer, and they want to make sure that their visa would allow that kind of activity. Is there any activity restriction other than employment with a visa that folks should be aware of for their students?
I would recommend having your student come speak with our office just to review what the class would entail. Sometimes if a student is earning a certificate or a degree, then it might be required that we transfer their SEVIS record to that other school. If it's just taking one class as like, it's just kind of incidental, like an art class, for example, or an extra math class, like on the side, and they're not earning a degree or a certificate, then that's just incidental. That's not a big deal or anything. But if they are earning a certificate or degree, then I would recommend that they contact our office so that we could review whether or not we need to transfer their SEVIS record to maintain their status.
Great, thank you. And I see that staff working the back end of this webinar have dropped information about the FERPA release waiver, so I know there were some questions about that. Feel free to check that out. And Lisa, I know we've talked about the need for sort of authorization if you're going to be employed off campus, and that you don't need to worry about on-campus employment. Does the same thing apply for internships? If it's an unpaid internship, are there stipulations that people should consider with their students' visa status?
Yeah, so if it's unpaid, if it's like a volunteer or an unpaid position, then they do not require authorization. Some places like the VA, for example, even though it's unpaid, they actually still require CPT. So sometimes it can depend on the employer. But the important thing to be aware of if it's an unpaid internship is that it's truly an unpaid internship, meaning that it isn't a job that they would typically pay somebody for, and then they're just choosing to employ your son or daughter and then not pay them. So just making sure that it's truly an unpaid or volunteer position. And if that's the case, then there's no authorization required.
Great, thank you so much. I see that there are a couple of other questions that aren't necessarily specific to the student's visa status. I will remind folks that we will be having another webinar later this week, when we'll be able to get to some of the questions that have been mentioned here. So we have reached our time for questions today. I want to thank you, Lisa, so much for your time and your expertise, and for all of the wisdom and support that ISFO shows for international students on campus. And to encourage the families who are here, to encourage your students to visit ISFO, to stop by, to get to know the advisors and the counselors there, and take advantage of all of the resources that they have. So with that, I do want to let folks know that we do have another session coming up So if we could just click to the next slide, that would be great. So our next session on Thursday is about safeguarding your students' records. So I know there was a question in the chat about insurance and living in the dorms. We've had questions about notaries. This is a great session to come to for that. We'll review ways to ensure that your students' educational records are private and why it's important that they keep them private. And with our student legal services team there, it's a great chance to ask some of those more nuanced questions. Also, you all noticed when you signed in to tonight's session, we have set up a virtual event space for you this week. I encourage you all to explore that virtual event hub, to take a look at the resources that are available and take advantage of this opportunity to connect with other international families, whether from your corner of the world or from your student college. So from the event hub, do head over to that community tab and explore some ways to connect with each other and share resources. You'll be able to use this virtual event space through the end of the day on Friday, so it'll be here all week. And tonight's recording will also be available in the event hub tomorrow. Again, with that brings us to the end of tonight's session. I want to thank Lisa once again for, great and informative session. Thank the staff helping out to answer questions and coordinate things on the back end. And of course, all of you for joining us. If we did not get to your question tonight, or if you have a question that is very specific to your student's experience, please feel free to reach out directly to the Parent and Family Programs office at parents@ucsd.edu. We'll go ahead and drop that email in the chat right now so that you can always contact us with any questions that you might have. Truly, at any time, don't hesitate to email. We are happy to help with whatever situation arises. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope to see you all back on Thursday for our next session, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.